What's up everyone? Lance Hedrick here, and today we're going to talk about how to optimize your cups of coffee, discussing both percolation and immersion.
Yep.
Now, before we jump into this video, I'd ask that you take a moment and hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, or if you've enjoyed some of my past content. If this is your first video, what's up? I'm Lance, and we're gonna get into some coffee stuff today. Now, there are a lot of ways that people are taught to brew coffee when they first jump in, and there are a lot of other ways that people are taught to brew coffee when they're really deep into the rabbit hole. And there are a lot of conflicting opinions out there on how to approach all these different various styles of brewing processes, from the V60 to the Clever to the French press to the Oria to the April brewer to the Stag X to the Kono to the Origami. There are so many out there, and I just listed like 3% of all the available drippers out there. Now, because of this convoluted market where it's difficult to know what really to buy, there comes a lot of complications in how to approach how you brew. Especially because the most famous ones out there, like the V60, the Chemex, they are actually quite difficult to brew consistent, really nice cups of coffee without having to change a lot of variables every time you change your coffee. And it's really difficult, nigh on impossible, to replicate the recipes you see online from people like myself telling you how you should brew your coffee. Now, the reason for the difficulty of translating brew recipes from here to you has a lot of different reasons. One of these issues that you run into is water quality. The water I'm using is likely different from the water that you're using. And I know you might be thinking, oh my goodness, water is a variable I need to think about. Yes, it is. And I highly recommend that you not use tap water unless you're in one of the privileged cities that has immaculate tap water, like places in New York or in Melbourne, Australia. If you don't have a really nice tap water system going on where your city water or well water is, in a really good range of hardness of the minerals that make that up, I recommend getting something like a Brita filter or something like that to kind of take out some of the off flavors that can be in your coffee. Now, the second biggest thing is the grinder. The grinder I'm using or the grinders I'm using likely won't be the same as yours. And even if they are, well, there are tolerances that vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, from machine to machine, and even from the same model to the same model. My certain grind setting may not be the same as yours. The alignment may not be the same. So your particle consistency is likely not the same as what mine is. Now, this actually plays a big role in how your coffee tastes. And I've noticed that some of the more successful recipes for people at home tend to rely on coarser grounds, and there's an absolutely easy reason for this. A big reason that people are loving, for instance, a lot of Tetsu Kasuya, he's a friend of mine out in Japan, a lot of his recipes, like the 4-6 recipe or his Hario Switch recipes, because the coarser you're grinding, the more compact that particle distribution is going to get for any given grinder. Now, what I mean by that is your grinders, from a cheap $50 hand grinder to an $8,000 grinder, they're all going to get more and more uniform the coarser you go. Largely. So when you go to a coarser grind size, when you're using a recipe that calls for a really coarse grind size, you're likely going to experience a better cup of coffee that's less muddled, has higher clarity, and is just overall a better cup for your taste buds. A lot of times I see people failing on recipes that call for higher extraction yields. That's because the majority of us don't have incredible grinders, and that's absolutely okay. And this is why a lot of people want to rely on immersion style brewing. Now, immersion style brewing, that would include a French press, cupping style brews, like where you actually just put water in grounds and filter it out, Clever brewers, AeroPress brewers, all of these tend to be really forgiving. And the reason for that is immersion is a more efficient extraction method than percolation. Percolation would be water kind of going through the bed and extracting through different pulses because we have clean solvent we're putting through the grounds. So it's able to extract some and it's sitting in the decanter. Extract some, sitting in the decanter. Whereas immersion, the water's just sitting with the grounds. So after a couple of seconds, you're extracting coffee with coffee. So if we took the same ratio of water to coffee grounds with a percolation style brew and an immersion style brew, whether it be a French press or whatever, you're going to get a higher extraction yield with percolation, lower extraction yield with immersion, but the extraction will be a whole lot more even with immersion. A huge issue that I've noticed is people have this machination that they need to grind really coarse for immersion brews because the water's sitting in contact for a long time with the coffee. But I would argue the exact opposite is what's needed because it's sitting in direct contact with the water for so long. As that water is sitting in the grounds, it's steeping, you're just trying to extract more coffee with coffee. The more coffee that's extracted, the less solvent power the water has. The less solvent power the water has, the less efficient it is at extracting whatever's left out of those coffee grounds. Percolation, on the other hand, is very efficient because you're constantly adding clean solvent. So something like the 4-6 method, which uses 5 pours, requires a really coarse grind size. It wants your bed to be dry between each pour. This makes sense because the coarser you go on your grinder, the more uniform, likely the better tasting coffee. So today what I wanted to talk about is this idea that's coming out more and more of mixing together percolation and immersion. Now, I actually have a video from about 2 years ago where I took a Hario Switch base, affixed it onto a tricklet brewer, and made what I called Percolative Immersion. That was literally the blending of these two. We're both immersing the coffee with water, and then we release the water to have that percolation. We can do multiple steeps, kind of like Gong Fu Cha in tea, but with coffee. Now, over the years, different things have been made to kind of replicate that, and most recently we have the Pulsar. Now, this is not yet out and available to the public, but it is something that Jonathan Gagne worked with this company on, and it is essentially a no-bypass brewer, like the tricklet, but also it has a valve so that you can steep and release to mix together percolation and immersion. Now, what's been on the market for a long time is the Hario Switch, and different things like this that allows you, like the Clever Dripper, to have a valve in the bottom to steep and release. But like the Clever, the Hario Switch has bypass. So the idea with this was to give you minimal to no bypass, so this would be no bypass, and have that same type of control. So what I want to do in this video today is I want to talk about kind of the marriage of immersion and percolation and how it is going to provide you the most consistent and tasty cup at home. Now, this is not telling you to run out and buy a Switch. I don't like telling people to go buy something. What you already have is likely good enough. A lot of people have gear acquisition syndrome, and if you're really wanting something, the Switch I think is a great way to go, or something like the Clever. Both have built-in steep and release systems, and then soon the Pulsar will have that same idea of steep and release. Now, the reason I think this is so great is you can rely, especially on the Switch, on coarser grounds, so that more uniform creation of grounds that the majority of grinders can give you as you go coarser and coarser. So using something like the Switch base on a V60 or on a few other brewers like the Kono Dripper, which gives you a lessened bypass than a V60, or putting a stag in here, that's why I have the stag out if you're wondering, this can be fit in there. Just like so, the rubber acts as a gasket so no water comes out. You can actually replicate that steep and release type of brewing method with any of these using the Switch base. Of course, you can't really replicate this unless you have a tricklet to put inside here, but with the tricklet, there's the issue of the filter's not pushed down with the sides of the walls like it is in this, so you could get bubbles kind of coming up and dislodging the filter, allowing grounds to get in the cup. If you're wanting something easy that you don't have to worry about the flow rate of your kettle, you don't have to worry about choking, you don't have to worry about your grinder quality to an extent. You don't have to really worry about a lot of those steps that are typically necessary in order to really replicate these recipes that people online are giving you. I think the Switch is a great solution. And I think that's why a lot of Tetsu's recipes have been so famous lately, like the Devil recipe and his 4-6 recipe, is because they call for coarser grounds. Now, immersion is immediately going to give you high efficiency in your extraction. The addition of percolation is going to give you optimizing extraction. So you can both get a high efficiency and optimization when you can use both of them in the same brew. All right, so let's stop talking and let's actually get an example here so I can show you what I'm talking about. I'll be using a Kono, and I'm going to throw it on the Switch because I really like conical brew profiles when it comes to percolation. This gives us minimal bypass because the filter can stick more to the side since there aren't a ton of ridges. The only ridges exist down where the bed would be, allowing for that partial bypass. But since we're having immersion, we shouldn't really worry about that except through the percolation stages. Since we have a valve, we have the capability of opening and closing the valve to steep when we want to steep and to release when we want to release. Now, because there is this space between the bottom of the brewer and the actual valve, there's going to be, with the Kono, about a 30-gram reservoir underneath. So I like to keep that in mind when I'm brewing so that we don't have water unused sitting underneath our filter of coffee. I don't release the bloom because I want that concentrated water staying there so so that when I pour my second pour for percolation or for immersion, we are using all of the water as efficiently as possible. Same thing can be said with putting a stag on there. That holds about 20 grams below it, or the V60, which holds around 20 to 30 grams below it as well. Now, something like the Pulsar, it's all in contact because the valve sits right at the base, and so we'll also do an example brew of that. But hopefully, after watching this video, you'll have a better understanding, if you've got a Clever, if you've got a French press, if you've got any of these, how to optimize your brewing at home for easy, consistent brewing. All right, let's get this set up and brew one. All right, so I'm starting this off with hot water just sitting here and steeping to heat all this up, because that can be kind of a heat sink. So I have water sitting with the valve closed, and then I'll release it, dump it, and good to go. I've ground this coffee quite coarsely, much coarser than even table salt. Because we're doing both percolation and immersion, and we're optimizing the extraction as well as optimizing the efficiency of the extraction, we don't have to go nearly as fine. And what this allows is an even more even extraction, because water can flow more evenly through these coarser grounds, and we can rely on a much cleaner tasting coffee that can be described as juicy. It has sweetness, it's got clarity, it's got body, because you're kind of getting best of both worlds. We're able to sit here and steep and release. So I'm gonna go ahead and release this water, dump it out, and we have a nice preheated brewer. All right, so to begin, I have 16 grams of coffee coarsely ground in my Kono with that switch base. I've got the valve closed, and so I'm just gonna pour my bloom. So I'm gonna do 3 times the weight, so about 48 grams. And I'm gonna let it sit here and bloom for about 45 seconds. Now, instead of releasing this, I'm gonna go ahead and pour my second pour, and then I'm gonna let that release. This bottom part has been filled up with that coffee, and since it's already been extracting some of that initial extractants, I don't wanna fill it up with essentially under-extracted coffee. So I'm gonna keep that there in order to make sure I'm optimizing the space that I have in the brewer for really nice percolation and immersion. So I'm doing my second pour, and I'm gonna pour up to about 140 grams. So now what's nice about this is I'm allowing this to steep, and so it's getting really efficient extraction in there. I'm allowing it to steep, 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 and the water down here has already been used. So it's gonna play a little bit of a part, but due to the low bypass of the Kono, it's not really going to make any negative effects to it. It's actually just gonna help us utilize as properly as possible the water in the top of this brewer. And after about 45 seconds to a minute, I'm gonna let it go. This is not a suggested recipe necessarily. I like this, this is a recipe that I've enjoyed for this coffee, but this is not a prescriptive, like, reuse this recipe. The fact of the matter is, with something like the Switch, you're able to kind of have a lot of fun in doing the steep and release until you get something that you're enjoying. You're gonna get best of both worlds. You're gonna get body, and you're gonna get that sweetness and acidity from these high extraction brews. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna release it about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And once that's drained out, I'm gonna do one final pour with the valve open for a final percolation step. So as you see, we're releasing it, the coffee's going through, and we're actually getting a little extra percolation, though it's not very efficient right now because that water's been pretty well extracted. It's a lot of coffee's in there right now. So we got that all through. Now I'm gonna pour to my final weight of 240 grams, just kind of pouring in a circle. Again, we don't have to rely on optimizing any type of extraction technique here because, again, how efficient this style of brewing is. We're able, again, to get best of both worlds. Not to sound redundant, but I can't stress how efficient this style of brewing is. We're able to let water sit with the coffee grounds, utilizing all of its solvent power in order to extract as evenly as possible throughout the bed. Then we release it, and the coffee is now fully saturated, leaving diffusion wide open for the taking. So once we pour that final percolation through, we're able to grab whatever is left in order to maximize our extraction without hurting the quality of the extraction. So we won't be getting a lot of channels, things like that. The brew is done. We're sitting close to 4 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and just take this off and we'll try it. Now this is a very lightly roasted washed Columbia from Mood Trap that I've been really enjoying, so I actually got some chocolate out on that. That's a first. Granted, it's been really well rested, but this coffee normally is very light, very floral, and it's very good. But this allows a little bit more of a juicy aspect to it, which is really appreciated. And I know a lot of you enjoy those bigger, bolder kind of cups of coffee. This is gonna get it without having that over-extracted feeling from channeling in the bed. It's gonna give you a much more balanced coffee than if you were to have to rely on a much finer grind to increase your extraction depending on your grinder. I cannot stress that enough. Your grinder quality has such a big impact on your brew. So if you're trying to replicate like, St. Hoffmann's or Carl Rowsell's or any of the other people who post the recipes, including my own, and you're not getting the exact results you're wanting, it could be because your grinder is giving you a really wide distribution, or it's giving you a lot of fines, or it's just not giving you the particle shape for optimal extraction. So you're getting a lot of over extraction in bits because you're grinding fine enough that it's hurting your particle size distribution. So something like this will allow you to grind a lot coarser, still maintain higher extractions, 20, 21, 22%, while you're able to get both that clarity, that florality, and then the body, the sweetness that you're wanting from your cup. This is a great option, having that switch where you can use it on a lot of your different drippers that fit, including the Stag, the Kono, or that Glass V60. Glass is terrible at maintaining heat, essentially. So I got rid of that in preference for something, once I found out the Kono fit, that's plastic, it can hold it a bit better. Granted, there's a little bit more of a reservoir underneath, but it's all good. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to take for higher thermal stability. Now, no bypass, which is the style of this brewer, kind of really got its, I guess, more global fame and recognition whenever the Tricklet came out. Now, I know that AirPresses have the no bypass, but those are kind of different unless you use it in a similar way like this, without the plunger and let it slow steep as you're pouring through a dispersion. You put a filter just on the bottom, you put coffee in, and then water has to go through coffee in order to escape. So you have no bypass. No water is getting around the bed of coffee, which is, a good thing if you're wanting to maximize your extraction. But there are issues where people are trying to push it way too far, it loses aroma, things like that. So there have been a lot of people who found out that the best way to use these is brewing with really coarse grounds, doing lots of small pours, but it can be a little tedious. So what this is Jonathan Gagne worked with NextLevel on making a valve on the bottom that's similar to the Percolative Immersion I did using the switch shoved into the bottom of the Tricklet. It gives you a similar type thing, but because this column doesn't hold the filter down, because you're creating like a vacuum, bubbles would come up, can dislodge the filter, have issues. This column pushes the filter down so you don't have that issue. Now what this allows is even coarser grounds, because you can really optimize the extraction since there's no bypass. So you can go even coarser than using the switch with any type of pour over that has built-in bypass, partial bypass, etc. So with this, I'm going really coarse, even coarser than before, as you can kind of see right here. I mean, these are large grounds. They are big. Coarser you can go at home, the better your grinder is likely going to perform, at least in the particle size distributions. I've seen they get more and more narrow the coarser and coarser you go. I've got my coffee here. The valve is closed, so I'm gonna just put a little water in there, just preheat it a bit. I'm not really worried about getting it too hot, but I wanted to heat up the dish up top. So we're gonna release that, then let me dump it and we'll get started. I'm just gonna take the top off, zero out my scale, toss in my grounds, which I have 16 grams. You normally want a little bit more than that with how wide this brewer is, but I found 16 is fine in here. And I'm gonna use a WDT tool to just level it out. All right. Now this is some really coarse grounds in here. I'm going to do my bloom with the valve closed. But because we're going so coarse, I'm actually gonna do wet WDT onto this bloom. So let me get it up to about 50 grams. Boom, there we are. We'll just open up the lid. There's a little bit that sticks there. Get the tool out. I'm just gonna do a little of this. Now, one of the reasons for doing this is it's going to cause some fines migration. So that's gonna help slow down the flow through. So it's not just flying through when we do our percolation phases. We want the fines to kind of clog the filter a bit to slow down the flow rate so that we can increase that contact time, increase our extraction. I'm gonna replace the top on, and we're gonna wait for it to sit here for about a minute. Once a minute's done, I'll open the valve, and I'm gonna close it again to do a first pour. Now, I'm going to open the valve after the bloom here because all the water is sitting in here. So there's no reservoir for it to fill like on the switch, so we'll be good to go after it completely drains that bloom. So we're at about a minute. I'm gonna open that up, let it drain out. I'm gonna close it again. Now I like to play around. Sometimes I'll do a percolation early, sometimes I'll do an immersion early. Right now I'm gonna do an early immersion. I'm gonna go up to about, again, 140 grams. and I'm gonna just let it sit for a while. Now, the idea with doing an early immersion is it should make the percolation later a little bit more effective because we're giving the water more time in contact with the grounds. So what that's allowing is because how coarse these grounds are, it's going to take longer for the water to penetrate to the depths of the grounds themselves. So it could take up to 2, 3, 4 minutes with how coarse we're at right now. We're well over 1,000 microns in diameter for these coarse grounds. I'm intentionally keeping the kettle here to cool down for that last phase, by the way. But while it's sitting here, I want to give tips on your clever and French press brews. I recommend going around 550, 600 microns in diameter, which is quite fine. The burr gap is not the same. So if you have a burr gap of 600 microns on a Commandante, for instance, that's going to be like 850, 900 microns. That's a lot coarser than what I'm talking about. You're going to want to go to like a 350 micron gap or so on a Commandante for your French press, for your clever, something like that. Then for things like this, where we can take advantage of percolation, I would go a lot coarser. If you're not enjoying your French presses, it could be because your grinder isn't great, or you're going really coarse and you're not getting as much extraction as you could. So I would recommend either going finer or trying something like percolation where you can go much more coarse. On a clever dripper, I recommend pouring your water in first, kind of like with a French press, and putting the coffee in, giving it some swirls, and letting it kind of sit there for a while. It's going to help with lessening the clogging of the filter. Like if you were to pour with your kettle, it can slow down the drawdown too much. And since you're using immersion, you want a faster draw through. Now I know some of you might say, well, I like to make French presses, I'll just pour it through a filter to clean it up. The amount of fines that are in your French press when you're done is quite a bit, and it can take a long time to drain through a filter because those fines are immediately going to have free reign to get into those pores and clog them up. It's actually better to use something like a clever where you're putting the water in first and then allowing the natural drawdown to happen through the filter to filter it out and make you a cleaner brew. If you're someone that enjoys those thick-bodied brews, but you don't like the silt that a French press gives, try out the clever or try out an AeroPress or something like that. Otherwise, again, I can't recommend enough getting something like this that allows you to steep and release. This is a prototype, it's not out yet, but it should be out soon enough. We're at 4 minutes, so I'm going to release this first immersion. And once it's done, I'm gonna leave the valve open and I'm gonna do my final percolation. So there's a pretty quick drawdown. It's just been sitting there. I'm gonna give it a little shake. Whenever you can shake your brews, all that's gonna do is level the bed. Just don't do it very aggressively and you're not gonna have much fines migration. When you shake, it kind of just levels and it can settle out some of the channels that might be forming in your bed. Thankfully, grinding this coarsely, you shouldn't really have a channeling problem. And if you do, it shouldn't be very difficult to get rid of with a simple shake. Now that the bed is fully dry, I'm gonna do my final pour up to 250 grams. So I'm just pouring in the center and letting it fall out of these holes as evenly as possible. And I'm gonna let it just draw through. Now, if I taste it at the end and I think it needs more extraction, I could split this up into 2 pours, and that would give me even cleaner solvent and a little extra agitation to ensure we're increasing our extraction a bit. But I think this will be just fine. I'm gonna give it a little swirl just to level that bed out as we do that final draw through. So overall, this is about a 6-minute brew. When you're doing immersion things, you wanna take a little bit extra time. Now, I know a lot of people will cup coffees and they'll say, wow, the taste from cupping coffee tastes even better than some of my pour overs, which I agree with. I love drinking cupped coffees. I'll even take the cups at the end of the cupping and sip from them very gently so the grounds stay at the bottom. It's an incredible way of drinking coffee because you get a good extraction from how long it's sitting there. You get a really nice, silky, thick, velvety body, but you do get a lot of grounds that kind of end up in your mouth. Now, this is already drained all the way through, again, because we had that really coarse grind size. So we're done with this. I'm just gonna tap out kind of the remaining bits, close off the valve, and set this to the side. So what I should be expecting is a really nice, evenly extracted brew. So something that is gonna give me a lot of florals, a lot of acidity, a lot of sweetness, and a good body to boot. Now, because we were able to go even coarser than we were on the Kono, I actually think the acidity should be presenting itself a little bit more vibrantly in this brew. And it is. It still has a nice thick body. It's not, it's not French press or clever thick because we're not sitting there immersing it for a long, long time and allowing a lot of the oils to kind of exit. But we're able to mix and match that immersion and the percolation together. Ugo, you want some?
No.
As he takes it.
Finally.
He says, I don't know how to brew. He doesn't get any more. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can kind of have best of both worlds. And I think the creation of the Hario Switch is a great kind of step forward into the evolution of brewing as far as kind of the accessibility goes. I don't think you really need to know what you're doing in order to get a great brew with the Switch. You don't even need a gooseneck kettle because you're not worrying about your flow rate. You're not worrying about a lot of those things because you're able to steep and release. Now, if you're wanting to do all percolation, obviously I would recommend getting a gooseneck. If you're wanting to do immersion, you don't need a gooseneck. When you have something like this, you can use a tea kettle or something like that. Like Rohan, one of my patrons, he's done a great video about how to brew using a spoon that he got the idea from Aramse, which is another great YouTube channel you should check out. But using the spoon to split the stream out of a heavy tea kettle where the stream is coming out way too aggressively, you can split it up using a spoon. But the idea here is, and what I want to get across is, with all of your grinders at home, if you're not finding recipes you're liking on your percolation brew methods, it could be because of your grinder. The coarser you can grind, the better results you're going to get, which is why I think a lot of you find success in the 4-6 recipe and other recipes that necessitate these really coarsely ground coffees. Because you can't really get good bodies on that style of brew, you can do something like this that both will increase your extraction efficiency and optimize your extraction, giving you best of all worlds, giving you body, giving you clarity, giving you florality, and just giving you a really nice, easily repeatable, hard to mess up brew method. If you all enjoyed this, please, I would urge you again to hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the bells for notifications when I post. Would really appreciate that. Hope you enjoyed this. If you want videos with more specific recipes, I can definitely do that, but I want to recommend these other YouTube channels. Aramse is a great YouTube channel to follow along with. Rohan's Pocket Science Instagram, he does a lot of great posts there, and also has a great clever recipe that I would recommend looking on his Instagram as well. Tetsu Kasuya's channel, it's in Japanese, but the subtitles are great. They're really intentional in making sure it's really accessible to especially English-speaking audiences. His Hario Switch recipes are great. If you're doing French press, you know, James Hoffmann has his recipe that kind of increases your clarity without getting a lot of the silt in the final one. Check out what other people are doing. These are the more accessible ways into brewing coffee when you can include immersion. But just know strict immersion is going to call for a nicer grinder because you do want to grind finer for those. These types of steep and release, you can go much coarser and use what you have. So it might be an easier jump in quality if you're filter only at home. Instead of buying a whole new grinder, maybe just get a Hario Switch or a Clever or a Pulsar when it comes out and really focus on these steep and releases with really coarse grounds. Again, if you have a nice grinder, you may want to implement something like wet WDT in order to slow the draw down, or stir or swirl or something like that. I'm going to enjoy this coffee and not share any more with Ugo because he disses my brewing skills, but it is what it is. I hope you have a lovely day. He's drinking from my decanter. He has sullied it. Disgusting. Brew something tasty. Cheers.